I will also share. I don't think I ever showed this screen when I've read it before. So let's do that. Hello, everyone. This is the Secure and Govern Team Review for December 14th. I'm going to read our mantra. Please keep the following in mind throughout this team review session. We are not our designs. We will not offend anyone in this room intentionally. We will practice benevolent radical candor, which is to care personally but challenge directly when sending feedback. We will be open to receiving benevolent radical candor feedback and will be, if necessary, willing to let go of things that aren't working. These sessions are about candid talk, spirited debate, fun, and passion for what we do as designers for a living. And with that, Michael, you will be walking us through. Oh, that didn't work. I thought hitting.
Yes. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. So you should be able to see a Figma prototype here of the MR.
Yep.
Okay. So I'll keep the walkthrough a little bit high level since I know you're both familiar with this, but there's certain areas you want me to dig into and talk about, or if you have questions as we're going through it, feel free to just raise them as we go, I guess.
Okay.
So what we're looking at here is essentially a updated version of the checks reports tab concept that we covered much earlier, like a couple design reviews ago. And that we were looking at the original design concepts or a couple different versions and trying to figure out what were some of the good aspects and bad aspects. I've since gone through and pulled sort of aspects from both of them and pulled them into a single uniform sort of proposal that should hopefully work a little bit better with the existing merge request experience today. And then, of course, I've been working closely with Alex Fracazzo on this to make sure that the overview tab and the changes tab sort of align with some of the work we're looking to propose in the checks tab. So coming into a merge request, the biggest thing on the overview is, this isn't obviously anything that I've designed, but what Alex has been working on is trying to revise the overview so that it's less overwhelming. And a big effort for that is getting rid of all these widgets that we have and just combining them into a single super widget. And really the thought process behind that is just to make it easier for users to understand what's going on in the MR and what needs to be addressed to get it to be merged. So at the top, we have sort of the main merge status in the super widget where you can see sort of whether it's blocked or not or ready. And then some details around just your typical mergeability of that. And then directly below that is sort of a new widget that we're introducing focused on highlighting checks. And so what this does is essentially summarizes all the aggregated items that would show up in the checks tab and gives users a high level summary of items that are blocking this merge request. And then they can click through on this view checks link to go to the merge request itself. One aspect that may or may not, we may or may not have opinions on here is we had the concept of including unresolved threads in this sort of checks section. But then as I was digging into the design aspect of including comments and threads into the checks design, it got a lot more complicated than it probably should have been, just trying to integrate that into it. And so for the sake of this proposal at the moment, we've removed comments and unresolved threads from the check section entirely. But those things can block a merge request, so it might make sense to find a way to integrate it here. But it does get complicated, so something to keep in mind as we work through the rest of this design and talk through it.
Do you know if it's really a might block merge requests? Is it something that the engineering group or whoever owns MR usage can set it up that thread do not block merges?
I don't know for a fact, but I do believe it's configurable.
Okay. So right now we're reviewing a design that has it configured so they don't block.
Yeah, well, actually, they do have this unresolved thread, so I guess it wouldn't. Yeah, it's not currently blocking it here, at least what we're seeing.
Okay.
So we're still relying on the existing mechanisms for unresolved threads, but all the other automated checks are handled through this check section.
And the problem you're running into is right now you have that single view checks button or that brings you to the checks tab. But if you put the unresolved threads in, that's not true.
Yeah, so Yeah, because adding the comments or unresolved threads into this check section gets really confusing because when you can comment on items like security findings, like trying to figure out the best like navigation path between those conversations gets a little weird. And then there's potential for a thread to be repeated across all three tabs too, because we're reflecting any conversations on the overview, but say you commented on a security finding in the changes tab, that would show up on that finding in the changes tab and would also show up in the checks tab, and it gets kind of weird.
Yeah.
So something to think about. I know Alex was liking the idea of having a dedicated comments tab, so potentially there's an opportunity to get rid of this high level like view check all checks thing, and then have each line item have a direct link. And then most of the time that would take you to the checks tab to a filtered view of it, but
Mhm.
potentially for like unresolved threads, you could take it to a different comments tab or something and do some filtering there.
Do our competitors break comments out into its own tab?
Yes and no. So GitHub, their main tab, their overview tab is called discussions, I believe, unless that's changed or I'm misremembering.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
So something
Carry
to
on.
keep in mind. I'm sure that will come up during our conversation with the PMs later today.
Yeah.
But anyhow, so coming into the main checks tab, as you two are both aware, we're sort of have these two high level categories of blockers and warnings. And blockers, of course, are anything that from the automated pipeline checks or checks process that can block a merge request. And then warnings are anything else that might be bad that should be looked at, but aren't necessarily things that would directly stop you from merging a merge request. So it could be like security findings that don't have a policy that impact them, but are still something you probably want to look at. And then down below, sort of these two high level categories is an area for all the individual like reports. So these essentially are a dedicated area to replace each of the widgets themselves. So we have security is the only example that's fleshed out, but some of these other ones probably, um, I'm sure we could come across, or I'm sure it'd be a very similar approach where you're kind of looking at the high level summary of all of the approvals or performance checks and things of that sort. So starting with blockers, because that's kind of the main or one of the big concepts of this checks idea. So what we're doing here is servicing, of course, all the items that are blocking this merge request and section them off into like sort of logical groupings on, and then trying to help users understand what needs to be done for each of those groupings to unblock this merge request. So in this case, like you can see approvals, we still have two that are required, or security findings, there are still 5 vulnerabilities that must be resolved. So we're really helping using this as a way to, one, help users understand what's blocking this merge request in a very like consistent way. And then also trying to help them understand what needs to be done to unblock each of these or to unblock each of these items. And then I don't have it really fleshed out yet, but adding some sort of filtering or search on this, I think could be really helpful because I know there's instances where like maybe a lot of security findings show up, or perhaps like pipeline has a bunch of jobs that fail or something like that. Like being able to filter this view down to a sort of scoped view. I'm using the word view too much, but
Filtered.
sort
A
of
filtered view.
a filtered view. There it is. What a concept. I think that could be helpful because it will help users to be able to focus in on specific like items that they want to deal with at the time. And then if we do go towards having a like direct link from each of these line items, that would enable that to be more plausible too. And then also giving users some control over potentially the order that things show up. So this would just be a simple drag and drop menu. You could click these and just position what order you want these checks to show up in. And that would be ideally a personal preference that would be sticky across all your merge requests. And then I also currently have this concept of the full screen view versus a split view. I'm not sure. I think there's value in both approaches, but as for like an MVP or even for the first while, like it's probably not necessary to have both options. So maybe this is something that will be descoped.
I think it's nice to have some of those so we can
Mhm.
feel like we're, you know, slimming the workload.
Yes, yeah. And I think there's like some efficiencies to be gained from this split view too, where like you can easily jump around to multiple items and it's a little bit easier to kind of just freeform flow through this versus if you were using the full screen view while having the full area to like focus in and work on a specific item is really nice. You lose the context when you come into this around like all the other items. And
Yeah.
you can paginate through them, which is, helpful to some degree, but you don't necessarily know what item you're paginating to next because it could be going from a security finding to an approval, for instance.
I almost wonder if the split should be the default.
Yeah, it certainly could be. I just know that like on smaller form factors, smaller screens and stuff, space is definitely an issue. And so there'll
Right.
be a bit more, I'm sure this will be a bit more complicated to implement because we'll have to not only do the split view, but then also make sure we're dealing with like mobile responsive aspects. When you come down to a smaller screen, it will have to get forced into probably like the full page view.
Mhm.
So you're sort of building out both already if you do the split view, just with some responsive behavior there.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think if our
I
argument
mean, you
is,
could minimize the nav. Sorry.
that's all right, go ahead.
You could minimize the nav in this view too. The
Mhm.
cat is trying to escape. Sorry. Keep going.
Yeah, and the split view could be really nice for like large screens too, because then you have a big work area potentially for the main content and you can
Sure.
easily jump around,
Yeah.
which,
I was going to say from a story perspective, if our story is that the whole point of this is to help focus the author so they can merge, the other view, the full screen view is more
Mhm.
of a focused sort of model.
Yep, totally.
So from that perspective, I guess it helps tell the story or continue the story.
Mhm.
But it doesn't, the problem with this type of setting is some people will probably want that one and some people probably want this one. It's not one of those things where it's cut and dry.
Yeah, oh, of course. And we see plenty of applications that offer different ways to view the same content.
Yeah.
And so this is just kind of leaning on that, giving users their own sort of way to go about it.
Yeah. So stuff like that is definitely nice to have. At least that's how I usually look at it when I'm designing.
Yep, I agree. I agree.
Yeah, that's awesome. I don't know if we covered that yesterday.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think I brushed over it a little bit because I know it probably like having both these views is really great, but I'm
Yeah.
sure we probably won't have them right out the gate. It'd probably be
Sure,
a while
sure.
before we can support both of them.
Sure.
What does the view all do
So
again?
so the view all would just take you to these individualized reports. So in this case, for security findings, that would take you to the full
Oh,
security
okay.
report.
Okay. I was wondering if those could be accordions as another nice to have. The sections.
Oh yeah, these sections. Yeah, I know we discussed that previously, and I ended up going towards this
The
filter
Yeah.
instead of doing the accordion, but doing an accordion could certainly work.
I mean, it's
Yeah,
another
because
nice
otherwise
thing. It's not necessary, but
if there's like 20, 25 security findings, does that start going into pagination, or maybe we're just like limiting the container height and then they're scrolling within?
Yeah, I would think probably pagination over scrolling, because I know scrolling can be a little, I don't know. It's weird. We have it in the merge request widget today when you're scrolling within each individual section, and I don't think it's a great experience personally. That's just my opinion.
yeah. So you'd have to put pagination into each section if necessary.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good point. Something I haven't covered yet.
That'll be good to have that answer because that is something I'm sure someone will bring up.
Does it look like one there? Yeah, some sort of a pagination makes sense. We could just do your typical paged level pagination, or we could just do the load more potentially too. Like we have servers 10 or 20 of them, and you can click a load more to keep populating them in. Might work. something to think about. So good thing to bring that up. Um, I guess the only other sort of details on this. So right now I'm trying to keep these designs of these check items pretty generic in the blockers and warnings view so that they are sort of consistent across the different categories. There might be a little bit more room to make these, add a little bit more information into these. Like for security findings, you see the names of them right now, but you don't really have context around like where it is in your code base. So potentially considering like adding a second line to these could be interesting to like show the
What-
location or something.
What, like line 33 or something?
Like it would show like maybe the file. So when you'd see like the file name and then the
Oh,
little
okay. That could
might
be
make
helpful.
sense. Yeah, for security findings, that could be useful. And then I'm sure, I suspect we could probably find some way to follow that pattern across the other check types too.
Yeah, I think what we want to try and do in today's call with PM is, I don't want to get too buried in the minutia of these types of things of, hey, what if you did that and what if you did this? I want
Yeah,
to make sure that we are. I'm not saying that we shouldn't talk about that here. I don't mean that. I'm just saying that if it should come up, I want to figure out a way to just like, yeah, it's a great idea. Let's parking lot that, and we'll talk about it. But this design is a solid MVC, and we can iterate and add on and tweak later. But this
Yep.
is what we want to. This has the intention. It solves all the goals of the user.
Mhm.
I want to make sure that we're able to say that with confidence.
Yes, yeah. Keep the conversation more at a high level and focus on what we're trying to enable for users, what kind of like, sort of outcome we're
Yeah,
supporting with
exactly.
this versus getting into the nuances. Yeah.
Here's a
agree.
question, because now we're separating checks from the changes tab. So I come here and I see that there is a secret being revealed in that location.
Mhm.
What is my next step for removing that secret? Do I then go to the changes tab, find that line item? Or do yeah.
Yeah, so you can do it either way potentially. So I only have the detailed view of the security that's going to be most relevant here, but you could come in here and I would think that you could click on this and it would take you directly to the changes tab itself to that file. Changes stuff in the changes tab isn't directly editable right now. Like I think the link on all of those files take you to like some weird commit hash version of that file that isn't actually editable, which is kind of a broken process right now. So I've added these options here within this like location code snippet section. And I think we'd want to support this in the changes tab as well.
Oh, love it. Love it. Love it. Great.
I think that would probably make sense. So just giving users those avenues to be able to directly hop in and start editing this file from either view, I think is going to be important.
Amazing. Yep.
Yeah, because the story is,
Cool.
this is your focal point. You don't have to go anywhere else. You just,
Right.
this is your checklist. Clear these out and you can merge.
Yep. Exactly.
I mean, there might be unresolved threads in the changes tab, which you could respond to from the changes tab or the overview tab. Right.
Yep.
Well, I mean, the
Yeah.
unresolved threads, that's what Michael was saying earlier. We need to figure that out.
Yep. And
But I also think
guess
that's kind of more of an Alex problem.
yeah,
Not
that's
to
a
be rude.
larger
Alex, if you're watching
MR
this,
wide
sorry, man.
thing.
Good luck.
That's something that makes sense for the create team with their expertise to decide on the best path for that.
Well said.
Well said.
Thank you. And so Becca, I know you asked about creating an issue, and I didn't include that in the original design, so I just added that here as sort of a split button for now. It's a little cryptic since I know the existing functionality, we have a dedicated button for that separate, and I don't want to have too many actions up here, so I kind of tucked it off on the side, but I know probably separate from this initiative, we probably need to look at that workflow and see about like, does that make sense? Is that what users want to do? Or do we use the vulnerability file and like defer it or dismiss it or do some sort of like snooze on it so you can merge it? But what Camellia?
Yeah,
and Justin
why
were
would
talking
they
about.
why would they create an issue?
Because they want to look into it separately, and that could either be in parallel of they may want to like keep the blocker on the merge request while they investigate this thing further to determine its overall risk issues. There's a lot of functionality that comes with that, including being able to assign it to somebody, add labels for tracking, things like that. So it may remain as a blocker until they work through that, or it may be something that a security engineer or a security savvy developer determines is not big enough to block this merge request, but they want to look into it in parallel. And they want
That's what I
to
was looking for.
bookmark it.
That's what I
Yeah.
was looking for. That they would keep this as a blocker, but still need to look into it in an issue.
Yeah, I think it could go either way.
Okay.
And I think
then-
that button is fine if it had like a tooltip when you hover over it, you know,
Yeah.
just make
Yeah, we
sure
would do
that.
that.
Yeah, yeah.
I was
When I
thinking
said
that too.
split button yesterday, I was thinking about the split drop down button we have, which I know has come up in the past as like, it's not ideal UX, but it's, if you click on the left part of it, it says dismiss finding. The right is actually like a little chevron. You click there and then it opens a menu that has different options in it. But it's such a funky component and interaction that I almost prefer something like this, but
Yeah, and this is actually consistent too with the threads. So we have the resolve threads on our comments right now.
look
So
at
it's
that.
very, very similar in terms of like the, paradigm or pattern that we're establishing.
Oh, I've never noticed that button. That's something that we already have, resolve thread with the issue. I
Yep.
just never created an issue from.
Yeah, I don't
I
think
wonder
it's
how
our
many
use
people
case.
do.
You know,
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
that's
Yep.
why we use it, but we're not a user.
Exactly. That's why we don't design for ourselves. User research and empathy for all the kids watching out there.
Yeah.
That's how you UX.
But I think this pattern works because it's saying it's literally small because it's a secondary or tertiary use case.
Sure.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I think it works.
I think it's great.
Cool. I guess some other changes I'll call out in this from our normal like vulnerability details is looking to add policy information here. So currently just listing them as bulleted lists. Most of the time I would suspect you'd only have one policy that it's impacting, but there's potential to have multiples, I'm sure. You could hover over those to get a summary or click on them and just pull that policy details drawer in so users can see all the information.
Have we talked to
You know, and
Camellia about this?
We have not. No, she has not seen these updated designs yet.
Okay.
I guess this is something that was in previous proposals, so it's not anything different. So she should be semi-aware, but I don't know where she stands on it.
Okay,
I'm also gonna make a note. I'm gonna make a note for myself here too. Like, is there a reason why we wouldn't include policy information on the vulnerability detail from the vulnerability report? Like, it might be interesting to see that this is something that's been identified as a blocker. It may inspire somebody to go and edit that policy, or just like
it definitely increases the weight of that particular vulnerability. If it's violating a policy, yet it still exists, that says this is a bigger problem that you should look into, according to
Well, and something else that we're starting to look into is viewing vulnerabilities on other branches outside of the default branch. And I was thinking about what exactly needs to change in that case. And I posted in the Threat Insights channel yesterday because I was like, I'm probably oversimplifying this, but like, is this not just a filter, an added filter on the vulnerability report, like branch equals, and you choose the branch that the vulnerabilities are on? If you could select a branch that's not the default branch, then they could be, oh my gosh, my head's going to explode again. They could be security findings that are still living in a merge request, no? In which case,
yeah.
we would also want to be able to filter by like which of these is blocking any merge request.
Yeah.
Whoa.
I think that makes sense. And like, I don't know if this is truly a reality, but you can create a policy after you already have vulnerabilities in your system. And that policy may impact existing vulnerabilities, perhaps. So even
Yeah,
adding policies retroactively.
Is that a separate setting, like apply retroactively or only from this point on? Do you know? I know it's not your
I don't know.
area of
No,
expertise.
I
Okay.
suspect it's
I can go
probably
into
just
policy.
from this point onward right now. That's probably the easier path, which I don't know.
I know
So
I designed 2 policies, and that's something that we considered. Like, do you want to retroactively apply this? And there was definitely some risk there. Like, I talked to people who were like, well, I'd want to see what specifically this is being retroactively applied to before applying it.
sure.
Anyway, sorry, we're going down a completely different path now, but
That's helpful though. I mean, it's all
yeah,
part of the same ecosystem, right?
yeah, I'm definitely going to make note of that
Mhm.
myself. That's interesting.
All right. Where were we? Anything else you guys want to discuss on policy? You all want to discuss on policies?
I just want to make sure that we review that to clear it. So in general,
Yep,
there's still polished stuff that we're going to finish off. I'm trying
for
to
sure.
communicate that there's sort of 2 things happening with our review. One is we just want the PMs to understand the direction. This is the direction. The majority of this shouldn't need to change. So they should be able to take this and say, we can now estimate and figure out how to build it. That's
Yep.
the goal of the later call today.
Mhm.
Doesn't mean that you're not going to continue to polish this and finish
Yep.
off roughly, smooth out the rough edges and that sort of thing.
For sure.
Which is making sure policy is taken care of, figuring out pagination, dealing with the split
Several
view
other
stuff.
things, yeah.
Yeah, working. I
Yep.
forgot. I got to make a note of that. Working with Alex on the. I'll just say create on the unresolved threads.
Yep. Yeah, good point. I think the other thing that could be worth discussing as we're all here is the introduction of adding an activity feed and specifically comment threads on vulnerabilities within the merge request. I know this doesn't exist on vulnerabilities today, and there's been discussions on introducing that. So I guess there'll be some debate on like the right way to approach that. Like, when we have discussions on a vulnerability in a merge request, does that carry over to the vulnerability if it were merged, for instance?
Yeah, I think at the least it would say in the vulnerability, like this vulnerability was mentioned in, and then a link to
Yeah,
the MR at the
that could be a
very
good idea.
least. Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah, that would make, I think that aligns with the way comments are handled on like changes right now, or to some degree, because I know comments on code changes themselves aren't actually shipped once the code is merged or aren't carried over. So
There's
interesting.
also an interesting thing to consider if you're creating an issue from here. Like, is there a way that we could, or if we should, carry over those comments?
And being able to just open up a vulnerability that's merged in and see sort of all the history without having to go somewhere else is also kind of nice too. So,
yeah.
Do we need that?
Conversations.
Do we want to say that we want this part of this build, or is that an iteration?
I think having activity or comments on vulnerabilities is a critical piece to being able to collaborate and work on this in a merge request. Because there's no way to like directly ask for help on these items.
No. I mean, yes.
Oh, sorry.
This has to for the MR. Yes.
Okay.
This design, but I mean the carrying it into the vulnerability report. So it's making it attached to this specific vulnerability So
Mhm.
somebody can reference it later, regardless of whether it's fixed or not, because our vulnerability report shows everything. It
Mhm.
becomes part of the database for that vulnerability, basically. That
Yeah,
sounds like it could be heavy lifting.
yeah, probably could be, but I guess I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. So we should make it as part of the proposal, but it's
Mhm.
also something that we can de-scope and iterate on later if it's heavy.
Yep, I think that seems reasonable.
Yeah.
Cool.
I mean,
Go ahead.
I'm just thinking through that a little bit more. Like, what if it was a thread that is kind of irrelevant? Like someone saying, is this the same thing as this? And then someone says, no, this isn't, this is a false positive.
I still think it's
Yeah.
worth having attached because someone else might have that question, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah. And if you do an audit and look at,
Yep.
you want to look at a specific vulnerability or vulnerability type, CVE 2018, whatever, it would provide some backtracking and like accountability, and
Mhm.
rather than just saying this came from this MR, go into the MR to look at what might
Yeah.
have been said there.
It seems like it would be useful. It's a historical sort of thing.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah, I
almost
think that
it's
makes
similar to the
sense.
whole blame concept, you know,
Oh, yep.
just knowing what happened to this vulnerability and how it was
Mhm.
dealt with.
Yeah, and then it creates sort of a single source of truth for that vulnerability too, so there's not multiple versions of it living across the ecosystem,
Yeah.
which is probably a pain to manage, I would suspect.
Yeah, I could see that just being something like progressive disclosure anyways, where it's like there was a thread and then maybe we don't show the entire thread, but then you can
Mhm.
like uncollapse and view.
Yeah, collapse by default type of thing.
Right.
Yep, agreed. Okay, so that is largely the blocker section. I think could be worth just digging into the security section a little bit more. Did a couple updates since I talked to you both yesterday, largely looking at this job widget. So updating the status to reflect the status of all of the jobs and not the status of it being like having blockers or not. Because previously this status was a failed status because there were blockers, but that wasn't necessarily clear. So, but may or may not be worthwhile having this here because there is sort of a discrepancy between the seeing the green check mark at the top versus the failed or blocker warning on the side. Maybe this isn't even worthwhile too. But I also added, these are now upload. These should be download buttons, but these are also essentially a way to download each of the job reports. So it's very similar to what we have on the pipeline page where we have the scan results and it says SAS found 230 vulnerabilities, download report.
I wonder about the discrepancy of the green because it's
Yeah.
inside, it's secondary information to the primary, which is that there are security problems.
Yep.
If it was out there, if you had like both or something, I could see how that would be confusing. But you're saying that part of this report is
Yep.
the pipelines, the jobs. Did they run
Mhm.
correctly? So I think it's okay. It's worth
Okay.
testing, I guess, just to see if it blows people's minds. But I feel like
Yeah.
that should be fine.
Okay. Good to know. Yeah, definitely something I think we'll want to ask users when you run this through testing.
What are your thoughts, Becca?
Are you talking about the icon next to
Right
certain
here.
pipeline jobs?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, that we chatted a little bit about that yesterday too.
Mhm.
It's just such a, like I was telling Michael yesterday, Justin, it's just such a weird mixed emotional state of like,
Yay!
security blockers. Yay, yeah, everything ran
But that's what
successfully
that's
and
what you
found
want
things.
because that's what this is saying. It's saying, yay, everything passed, all my jobs were run, so I can have faith in the content below. Those blockers were actually found.
But when
I
a
mean, that's
job
the right
didn't
response.
run successfully and so what would the icon be there? It'd be that do not enter.
Yeah, so it depends on the status, but if it failed completely, it would be the do not enter, because that would potentially could be a blocker for the merge request, but doesn't have to be. So that's conflating the single or
Right,
conflating the meaning of the
where would
icon.
we, so that could be a blocker in and of itself, right? So all SAST analyzers have to run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think what we would do is if it's required and that job failed, we would show the failed icon here. If it
Mm.
wasn't required and it failed, pipelines, I think, use this red X. So maybe it's like a discrepancy in the icon, because I think that's what we use on the pipeline widget today, which doesn't represent it here. But when a pipeline fails, it's the big red X and not the blocker symbol today.
So sorry, so are we counting, we would be counting that as a blocker, right? All of my SAST jobs need to run successfully. SemGrep ran successfully, but Brakeman did not.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so needing to find then the blocker is figuring out why Brakeman didn't pass.
Yep.
And
Yeah, and that would probably be surfaced as a pipeline failure or a pipeline blocker instead of a security blocker, since
okay.
it's a result of the pipeline itself. So that would surface under this pipelines category, which I haven't really fleshed out yet.
Michael, you only had to do a million things. You couldn't do like 1,000,001 things.
I know, I'm really just slacking over here.
Having that answer though is helpful. Being able to say, well, that would show up as a pipeline blocker. That makes sense to me, and I think that that's a good answer.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Now you'd have to
Cool.
link back. That's one catch, but you have the view pipeline, so that's fine.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah,
So, but then what happens here if, so SAST, let's say SemGrep is the one that failed.
Yep.
And then would it say blockers 1, not because there's a vulnerability blocking, but because the failure itself is blocking?
No, these would all be zeroed out, probably is what I would suspect. So that not zeros, but they would be
But
dashes.
like a dash. Yeah. Okay.
Since it
I
didn't
like
actually
that.
complete.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the content for the information below on the success of the job.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that makes sense. Keep that. Don't mix.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Okay, cool.
I guess maybe
And then-
blockers
But-
found, like the label.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. Being a little bit more clear that this is like a finding that's a blocker and not some other blocker type thing. There's some opportunity to add clarity there.
Yeah, something like that.
And clarity to the.
Ugh, but it's so nice to have it a short word.
I know.
We're going to keep this layout.
I'll remember that note later.
And then, well, I don't think so I don't know how I feel about the icon being there. I almost want to keep it now because if they didn't all pass and we don't have an icon there, it would say what, 6 pipeline jobs detected for security checks, 1 failure. And we'd be
Yep.
relying on red
That-
text alone that doesn't have an icon. So
Yeah.
that's not accessibility friendly.
Mm-hmm.
So I say keep the icon.
Okay.
Yeah, I think our UX hats are a little too tight if we're worried about that particular thing. I think
Yeah.
this is appropriate for this,
Cool.
for the goal of the user when they're looking at this. I think it's
Yep.
appropriate to give them a status report with graphics.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. So we'll leave this as is, minus potentially an opportunity to clarify the blocker. And then I'll put together some states around what sort of it looks like if any of these fail and how that boils up at some point. Okay, then beyond that, so the other changes that I did is just adding the filter in here, basically kind of mimicking what you did, Becca, but not having the grouping or saved views, just kind of solely leaning on filtering for now. And then looking to add a row for policies. And instead of listing out the policies, I just put a number on how many policies that are impacting a specific finding. Hopefully you'd be able to still filter by specific policies here and get results based on like whatever policies are available, but then to view any of these policies, you'd still have to click through to the full details.
I wonder if you could do the drawer view though here. Hover, get a tooltip, and then it has the two policies listed. You can click on each individual one. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely possibility for that. So yeah, I could certainly explore what that would look like because I guess I already had that here. So we just have to segment the policies by two separate ones or something. I don't know if it's helpful to provide the summary if you were to hover over this or just to provide the name of both policies.
Yeah.
Because it
I
could
don't
just
know.
be a
That's
list
a
of each
question for
policy. Yep.
that's a question for community because I know that they're also
Mhm.
this might be for frameworks. I think there's a way to put a description for the policies too.
Yeah, I believe so. Most of this is in here. I think the required actions is something that Andy and I added sort of as a speculative, like could be helpful to have. But I think the rest of this content is pretty much exactly how it is.
Yeah, I think what we want to do is pull in those two bullets in the tooltip.
Mm-hmm.
No, to the left, with that you clicked on to show that view.
Oh yeah. Yep.
That's what would be in the tooltip.
In the
Yep.
popover.
Yeah.
Sure. And then you could click on either of those and they would open
They're
up the
two different
drawer.
components. Say tooltip, you better mean it.
Silly pajamas.
Cool. And then something else that I guess I'd be curious to get your feedback on. So I know you have the, like when certain findings come up, we obviously want people to go and fix those findings and then rerun the pipeline. And then those findings would either be marked as fixed or no longer detected. So I thought it could be helpful since this would default to detected and dismissed to sort of highlight to users when findings have been resolved, but maybe there's a better mechanism for doing that, or maybe that's not super important here. I'm just using this alert as a way to communicate that. And then you could click on this and it would just update the filter to show the findings that are no longer detected.
And the badge counter would change too, so you'd have less blockers.
Yes. Yeah, whenever findings that are blockers are remediated, then yeah, the count would go down.
I think that something like this is cool. I also wonder if it's an opportunity for delight
Mm-hmm.
because they're checking off their list.
Yeah. Yeah, and the reason I put that here is because obviously you'd have to fix the issue, then push up those commits, and then the pipeline would have to run again. So you may not come back to this immediately. You may come back a little bit later. But I think, yeah, there's still opportunity to make this a little bit more exciting.
I also wonder if I can hear it now. People don't want to see the dismissed ones by default because that's what we're already hearing for the
Oh, sure. Yeah.
security tab of the pipeline. So
I mean, I could also see it saying status equals detected, but then I'd feel a lot better about removing dismissed if there was a similar alert up top that says,
Mhm.
3 previous identified findings were dismissed, view findings.
Yeah.
So I could see that being used too.
I
It would be
know.
too much real estate. I almost want that view findings button to just be in line, and then that way I wouldn't feel bad about having
know.
2
Same.
of them. Yeah,
Same.
but that's not part of that alert pattern, huh?
No, it's not. Yeah. I thought about modifying it to do that actually, but
Yeah,
I decided to just play by the rules for now.
yeah.
I know you've been talking about removing the single stat widgets, status stat widgets on the vulnerability report right now.
Yeah.
We could, though, think about potentially using them here, putting 4 of them across, and it could just be like all vulnerabilities detected, dismissed, no longer detected, and then each of those could act as a quick filter to update the status down below. But I know that
Well, I mean,
doesn't align
that's
with the
that's
current
part of the problem.
way.
Is people think they're filters.
Yeah, and
You would be
most
muddying the
applications
waters
those
if you
are.
made them filters. I know.
It's just weird to follow paradigms established by other apps, right?
Don't do that.
Well, that's
We're-
part
we're
of
like
the
Apple. We
upcoming
establish
research
our
I'll be doing
pattern.
on dashboards is looking more closely at that.
Mhm.
But yeah, I'd be hesitant to green light
Mhm.
putting it here and using it in a different way unless it's like has parity with the.
Yeah, I feel like that sort of implementation would have a lot more value though, because then you can see quick punch lists around what sort of status each of the vulnerabilities are in. So you know, like if you resolve something, you can see those counts go up and down. So it kind of helps you as another like to-do list of sorts.
Yeah.
Like there's utility to having those if we were to make them work like that. But the thought. But I understand making them work differently than they do elsewhere is also a recipe for confusion. So something to think about.
What are those things called
Mm.
again?
Single stat widgets. Or just single stat component, something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like a third party thing because we use um like an open source charts.
Mm-hmm.
Because I agree there's something funky going on here with like setting default filters that we know people want to see, but then how do we also surface that there are things being hidden?
Yeah.
Unless we like auto grouped by and not allowing like too many grouping options, but just like I'm just thinking out loud. I'm not actually saying this is like the best path forward, but I could see us saying like there's one bucket with detected,
Mhm.
and then that's maybe like auto expanded, uncollapsed, but then they get to the bottom and they can see there's 2 more buckets that they could uncollapse that say resolved and dismissed. But then how does that work with filters? Yeah, then we wouldn't apply a default filter to
Mhm.
imply that we're showing all statuses. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
I get
Yeah,
what you're
but
saying, yeah. Or go ahead,
maybe from
Justin.
the report perspective, I guess it makes sense. But from the goal of merging, what benefit does that give them? To make sure that it actually cleared out the particular thing they were trying to clear out as a validation check for themselves?
Yeah, I think that's the purpose of showing these high level categories, whether they're grouped or there's a single status widget, is to help them sort of see the progress being made. So if you were in a merge request and you saw the numbers
Well, I
come
mean,
back
like
later, yeah.
the checks 10 would go down, the security findings 13 would go down, the blockers
Mhm.
badge would go down,
What do you mean go down?
the counter, because you're clearing things off.
Yeah, I guess that's another question around security findings. So when we hide them, does that impact the count? Or do we only count detected ones? That's been something
Well,
that
I
I guess
mean,
has been.
you're filtering on detected and dismissed, so they wouldn't, if they were actually detected or dismissed, they wouldn't show up in that list anymore.
Yep.
What?
So
If
you're
they're
saying,
dismissed, they wouldn't show up in that list. And
Well, I mean,
um,
if they're not detected because you cleared it, you fixed it, then it wouldn't show up in the list because you're only showing detected.
But if you
But
were
then
to
it-
remove this filter and there were, say, 5 that are no longer detected, would that jump up to 18, the count? Or do we only count the ones that can be, like, action can be taken on or that need to be dealt with?
I mean, the security findings 13 counter. Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
Becca, what do we do now?
Wait, okay, I just want to make sure I'm understanding this. So you're saying maybe we show the dismissed ones, but just don't count it as a blocker?
Well, thought
I
that's
guess
you were
what
saying.
what I'm getting at anyways is that this count up top right here,
Mhm.
should that be a count of all findings in this merge request regardless of status, or should that be a count of only items that need to be dealt with or resolved?
Or
Right.
is it based on the filter that's currently set?
Yes, that was the third option. And so I think currently I have it as showing aligning with the filter. But that's kind of a
Because when
loose.
they remove all security blockers, they get a green check mark over to the left
Yep.
over there.
Mhm. They-
So
Potentially have it could be a warning too, if there's still other security findings that aren't blockers, but you know, not a big deal. But it would update on this sidebar to reflect.
like, do you know what that means for the other categories? Like, I'm sure this was just a placeholder, but performance has a warning.
Yep. So that would be like, say we found code quality issues, but they're
Yeah.
not required to be fixed.
Right. Okay.
I think this is a question on filtering, and also what is the goal and how much control over our typical vulnerability report do they need when they're focusing on mergeability.
Mm-hmm.
So right now we're just taking, like we're copying the vulnerability report and we're putting it in here. Maybe we're pulling out the grouping and the save view stuff, but ultimately that's what this is.
Yeah.
Should
Yep.
we do that? Or do we just say detected and dismissed, period? You don't get to change the filter. That's what you're viewing. Things that are pertinent to your MR.
I think it can be helpful to see items that you've resolved, though. That's an assumption. I don't know that for a fact, but just to see it in a state of resolved is sort of an added like peace of mind, right? To know that it actually was dealt with properly.
And to Becca's point, that could be a different section, just as a way to confirm, you
True.
know, that. But then we're also still changing this to be similar but different to the actual vulnerability report. This is a merge vulnerability report.
Yeah.
You know.
So the idea of the working model here is that because you're showing in the activity column the blocker symbol,
Mm-hmm.
so you were going off the theory here, we're going to show everything except resolved ones. But we're going to
Yes.
show detected and dismissed.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to keep showing them. But then once the blockers are gone, then that security icon changes, whether it's warning or green check mark.
Yep. Exactly. Yep. And we could also just show everything here and not auto filter. And then if people apply filters, good for them.
So right now, this is only showing things that were found in this MR.
Yep. It's not showing anything that's been fixed, but it is showing things that have been dismissed in this current example.
Right.
It's almost like you would then want a activity filter auto. No. Because you're sorting by severity here, but I don't want to see a bunch of dismissed at the top, even if they're dismissed criticals.
Yep.
I was just thinking about what we should be highlighting. Like in that case, would we want to be highlighting the detected highs rather than the dismissed criticals?
The
Mhm.
goal of this is to clear out blockers, period.
Yep. So then dismissed probably would make sense to not be shown by default, and you'd only see only detected items. We could, we could auto put a filter on here to show only blockers, but I think that kind of conflates with
Yeah,
this whole
I agree.
concept anyways.
Yeah, you're coming to the report so you can sort of get a deeper dive. For the most
Yep.
part, this user, the author, shouldn't need to come here.
Yeah, very
So
true.
why would they? I guess that's the question we need to ask. Why would they come here? And that is what this UI should support.
Mhm.
Because you're saying that the MR author should only go to blockers and not the security.
That's the intent. The second
Yeah.
half of that left nav underneath the divider line is
Mhm.
Yeah.
because
For
you want to
domain
dig into
experts,
some,
kinda,
yeah, like you want
Yes.
to dig into something for some reason. Otherwise, the author, clear out your blockers and you're good, man.
Mhm. Exactly it.
Well, and this also kind of ties back with permissions. Like, I think there are teams that don't want their developers to be able to dismiss all security findings.
Mhm.
That doesn't matter
It
if
would-
you're in the blocker section or the security section.
Yeah, and I don't make it necessarily clear, but the thought process is that this dismissal action would only be visible to people who have the action, have the permission to do so, or
Yeah.
maybe it
So
would
if
be
you-
disabled.
If you're the author and you're like, I don't know how to fix this, or I think this is stupid, you'll add a comment and you'll ping the right person to ask them
Yep.
to clear it out for you.
Mhm.
But that doesn't change what view you're on, you know.
Mhm.
So
There may be a security engineer that wants to come in here and identify something as a blocker that's not a capital B blocker, but
Yep.
something that they're not comfortable giving their approval on
Mhm.
without it being addressed.
okay, so
Yeah.
I think that filter, that default filter, needs to reflect the goals of the person that would come to this tab.
I almost say we don't put any default filter on it. We just show everything, and then they can apply their filters as they see fit. But that's just my gut thought.
I would say to do that if we don't know the answer to the why.
Yeah. That's fine with me. And that would make this sort of notification up at the top irrelevant because you just see it all anyway. I still think having the counts up top of the different status categories could be helpful, but I know there's a lot of weight behind that, so I'll leave it up for now.
Becca, what do you think about just defaulting it, no filters, showing every single thing that this particular pipeline found for this MR?
Yep, scope to the MR. And I guess that's something that's also not clear here is how do we make users understand that these are only findings that are related
Well, it's not
to the
clear
MR.
because we've been so bad at doing that. That is the mental model I think anyone gets when they come here and they're retaught that, well, no, we haven't figured out how to do that. So that's not how it works.
Yep.
That's just
Good point.
implied. That's the way it should
Mhm.
be.
Yep. And I think that's what
This is-
Becca said yesterday too.
This
Implied.
is so much harder than the vulnerability report because the vulnerability report, you're assuming that the security team is going in there. So we do apply those default filters of status is needs triage and confirmed.
Mhm.
Because the assumption there is that anything that's been dismissed or resolved was done by, can I say that? Was done by a security person because it's already, there was already a review process that happened in the EMR. So anything that was dismissed or resolved, I mean, is easy. Like if it's resolved, it's resolved. It's no longer there. But if it was dismissed, I guess it could have been dismissed at the merge request level. But we
Mhm.
know that people only want to see like essentially a checklist of to-dos. So it would make sense to me to only show detected here as well. And then if somebody wants to like really dig in and look for dismissed, it's the same mentality as on the vulnerability report. Like they have to actively add a filter of dismissed.
So we default this view for the merge author as well. And then if a sec engineer wants to come in, they're they can clear out all pre-filters that we've applied. That's what I think you're saying. We either start with the sec engineer and have no filter because we don't know what their goal is, or we say, well, everything we're doing is for the merge author anyway, so we should continue that trend and pre-filter this to say only detected because that's what they care about anyway.
I mean, if I, a security engineer, come in here and see that blockers are 0, but then there's like an exclamation point on the security tab, that tells me like, okay, there's no blockers, but there were security findings. And then I'm going to click on the security tab. What am I going to see? I guess in that case, well, I could see that going either way. I could see it saying like status equals detected and seeing none. Or no, status equals detected, but there's no, or there's no blockers.
Yep.
Yeah. Or I come in here and it says status is detected or dismissed.
Wait,
and I want to review the dismissed.
Aren't these all detected?
Yeah. Well,
Like,
detected is the default state when it comes into a merge request. The only other 2 states would be like fixed or no longer detected or dismissed.
well,
So
what
there's only
happens
3
if you,
states possible in a
This
merge
is why
request.
we changed
I
the
see, I see.
wording from detected to needs triage on the vulnerability report, because you can, just because you remove detected doesn't mean it's no longer detected. It could still be detected and also dismissed. So now there's a conversation going on. Should we change the word here to also needs triage? And I'm thinking the answer is yes. But it's
And that
just
makes
harder
sense.
to say needs triage at this point because it could be a false positive. So
Yeah.
really it's more like needs assessing.
I know the
No,
last
triaging is
company I worked
assessing.
for.
Is
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. I mean, that's what you're doing. You're assessing it. Triage is a form of assessment. You're
Yep.
assessing if somebody is worth trying to save, considering how much other people are about to die. And that's where it comes from. You know, that's the point.
It's weird because when you think of triage, like in an emergency room, it's not like, is this person dying? I mean, if they're covered in blood, they're probably dying.
But
Sorry.
Not necessarily.
It's just, I think it's just a
Might not be
quicker
their blood.
assessment.
They might.
No, that's true. Hey, you know,
That is true. You could have a false positive to someone dying. Okay, I'm sorry. It's going off. the
triage
rails.
is assessment, bottom line. So it's the same
Yep.
thing.
Yes.
So
I
it
know
seems
the-
like we should change detected to needs triage here as well.
Yeah. I think there's something nice about consistency. Having consistent states for findings regardless of where they show up in the application.
I agree.
So
That
then if
should
they come
definitely be
here and it
consistent.
says needs triage, there's no blockers, but it says needs triage, then you'd want to see the stuff that's only still in that state. You don't want to see the dismissed ones.
Most of the time, yeah. I think the argument for showing the other stuff, and it may be a false or bad argument, is that it's helpful to understand the work that has been done on this merge request. Maybe that's not important. To see that the needle's moved, we've addressed some security issues already. But
I mean, I
maybe
can
just
see
seeing
that
the
argument
count go
too.
down. Yeah.
I think we have to have a point of view on the goal, who it is, who's the performer, and what's their goal.
Mhm.
Reviewing the blockers, that's pretty clear. It's the author.
Yep.
Primary. Secondary is still probably going to be an AppSec engineer. But when you're viewing the security report, who's the performer? Who's the primary performer?
I think largely it would be people that are heavily focused on security. It's probably a security person. It could be a developer who's just super conscious of security findings in their code or something.
And then they might want to see dismissed because they want to, maybe their company doesn't have permission set up correctly. And they want to see if the author is dismissing stuff when they shouldn't.
Yeah.
Maybe it's
Yeah.
something like that too.
and dismissed items would be immediately taken out of the blocker section, so they just kind of disappear. So coming to the security report could be a place for them to verify what items have been acted upon.
I mean, I'm starting to be convinced that this filtering is still appropriate.
Yeah,
So
I
if
think
somebody comes in here and dismisses all of them, which I'm not even going to ask you about bulk functionality.
got a
I'm
little
sure
bit of that.
that's another
Check
step. Yeah, it looks like there is bulk functionality built in there.
Yep. There's some here. I haven't done it in the security report yet, but
Okay.
and I haven't fleshed out what that actually looks like yet. I have thoughts, but they're just thoughts.
Because if I come in here, if I've dismissed all vulnerabilities, blocking or not, now I'm wondering, should there still be an exclamation point, like the warning sign under security? Like,
Then it
we
would
found stuff, but
be
it was all dismissed.
at that point
No.
it would be a green check, I would think.
Yeah, that's
Say,
what I would think too.
Yep.
Yeah, because everything's been cleared out. Whether it's
Mm-hmm.
correctly cleared out or not, that's not our problem. We're
Yep.
giving
It's
them the
also
tools
weird
to
that
assess that themselves, but somebody has made that decision, so we need to reflect that decision.
Mhm.
it's really confusing, is it not, that like security findings could be at 0, but secrets, if there's a blocking secret, would that change order, that tab?
Order was very arbitrary right now. So it could. It probably shouldn't, because I think tabs moving around is kind of weird.
Not
So-
dynamically, no. But
And
secrets
for what
more
it's worth,
important.
Or not
secrets
move,
today,
but like default to the one that has, like, if we're taking secrets out of security findings,
Mhm.
maybe, and security findings is at 0, like you see this blocker symbol under
Mhm.
security, there's a blocking secret, there's no security findings, so then you have to manually click on secrets
Mhm.
to see that blocker. Maybe it just defaults to the secrets tab, it doesn't change order, but
I see what you're saying. Auto selects it for you.
right.
Mhm. That could be fine.
I
Just
could
to
see there
jump
being a
to
miscommunication if they see that there's empty state for security findings. They're like, what? I'm done.
Right.
Yep. And if there are blockers, I
Technically,
mean,
that
hopefully they
counter is
should.
meant as the queue.
Yep.
Yeah, and as
But-
Michael is saying, I mean, that blocker would be linked from the blockers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you should be able to jump right there. Yeah,
Mhm.
right.
Yeah, we probably shouldn't change that.
Yep. We could leverage the same sort of system that Andy established for this checks tab, where we have the failed or the blocker warning all good for each of these tabs. So if there are any blockers under security, show that icon or show
I
the
can get
check
behind
if
that.
it's all good.
And that helps carry through the concern about the green check in the pipeline.
True. Yeah.
It strengthens that, yeah, that's green, but you're not green.
Yep. I think that could
Yeah.
make sense.
Add
I
that
think
in.
I'm
I like
landing
that.
on this should default to status equals needs triage.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's either that or we just do no filters. I'm okay with
Right.
either one. I think what I have represented here is probably not accurate for what we would want. So, but
I
I'm
want
fine
a
picking one or
cascading.
the other and just going with it and seeing what people say.
If we didn't apply any filter, it's like I almost want this cascading sort where it's like it sorts by, is it a blocker? If there are several blockers, then filter within detected or needs triage at the top, and then within that, critical at the top. I don't know.
So
if
you
guys
almost
are
want to
following
like,
me.
yeah, I definitely am following you. It almost seems like you want to have it sort by overall risk assessment. It's weighing all of these different
Right.
aspects, or just more black and white, a cascading filter like you were talking about.
Because I know if we're going to default to sorting by severity, which makes sense because that's what we do on the vulnerability report. Although on the vulnerability report, it's not showing dismissed. Like, if it just happens that there's a bunch of dismissed criticals at the top. No, we definitely would want the blockers to show at the top. If we
Yeah,
don't default to detected / needs triage, whatever we're calling it.
that's what I can type.
I just think it's easier if we default to detected needs triage. So you don't have to deal with dismissed critical blocker. No, well, you can't have a dismissed critical blocker, but you could have a dismissed critical.
Mhm.
But that's weird if you have a blocker that's a critical and a blocker that's a high. And then below you have a dismissed critical. Because then what are we sorting by? I don't know. I don't know if either of you are following me.
I genuinely
Um,
get what you're saying. Like there's a thousand ways we could do this, and it's
Focus
hard
on
to
the
figure out
job
how to,
performer and their goals.
yes.
That's all I can tell you.
Yeah. And Becca, what you're getting at, it seems like, is you're just trying to make the most important actionable items arise to the top of this list, is what it seems like you're kind of talking towards.
yeah. I'm just talking myself into not showing dismissed. And anyone that's familiar with the vulnerability report knows that they need to remove the needs triage filter if they want to see the dismissed ones,
Mhm.
which could be a use case and they may want to do that, but
Do
I
you
don't
know,
think it should be the
Becca, if
default.
the filters on the vulnerability report are persistent based on users' preferences? So if I were to come into our vulnerability report and change the filter, does that always reflect what I set for me? And you could do the same for you? Or it always defaults back to the same
No, it always
set?
defaults back to our default, which is
Mhm.
status equals needs triage and resolve. Needs triage and confirmed.
But that's what the save
But
use
that's what the
fixes.
saved views is going
It's
to
addressing, yeah,
accomplish,
okay.
is that they can set their own defaults. Not that you
Hmm.
should add saved views here.
Yeah, well, now I'm kind of wondering, like, would it make sense down the road to leverage those exact same saved views and make them available here? I don't know. But that's a problem for a different day, I think.
I think that's where we need to make sure we have good feedback loops and analytics. So users can easily get used to it in the vulnerability report
Mhm.
and then ask for that here if they decide that that makes sense to them.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, I think for the sake of what we do for default here, at some point this probably should go through some user testing, even though it has in different versions in the past. So that's something I could maybe make a point to ask users on, like what they would expect to see. So maybe help inform our decision. But either way, I don't think it's a big deal. If we decide one way, it probably isn't going to be too much of a lift to shift the default to something else.
Yeah.
And I think it's really just two options. It's either no filtering or only showing detected.
Yeah.
Cool. I know we're pretty well over time now.
Yeah.
So if we
But
want
I
to keep
think this
going,
was-
I've certainly got time, but otherwise we can just cap it.
Is there anything else to go over? I think I made notes on all the things to consider.
Yeah, that was the bulk of it. I think the only thing we didn't touch on is like the empty state. And this is, I think there's opportunity to make this better. It's a little bit of a punt, to be honest, but just communicating that we want to use the empty state as a way to help keep users moving through their workflow.
Yeah, the only thing here that would make this incorrect is those unresolved threads, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That could potentially make this inaccurate.
Well, we got to figure out how that fits in because that's still a blocker. So there's got to be some
Yes.
way to.
Yep.
This is assuming literally there are no blockers.
Yes.
Yeah, could there not, or have you considered like unresolved threads as one of the blockers?
I did, yep. And the reason I didn't do that is it got kind of confusing because then you have, if you have these threads available on vulnerabilities here, then the thread's potentially showing up in multiple places because you have the thread on the vulnerability details itself, but then you also have a section for unresolved threads where that thread also shows up. So then that's sort of showing up twice as a blocker.
Mm. Do you have to list it under unresolved threads? Like maybe.
I would think so, because then it'd be consistent.
Right, right.
So then
Here's
when
the
you
thing,
click
though.
on that, yeah, go
On the
ahead.
overview tab, you could have an unresolved thread and you can also just have a comment that doesn't matter,
Yep,
right?
exactly.
So I wonder if that sort of implies that it should be a blocker and you can view it in multiple places. You can view lots of things multiple places already in this view or in this section of the app.
Here. Let's see, I did some exploration around threads at some point here. Had a view. It's different design files, so give me a second to find it. I do with that. So here's, that's not what I'm looking for. It's bigger. We got so many artboard board versions, it's kind of stupid. I had a full design of what threads could look like. Here we are. So threads in general, if this prototype is even still working. This out of the way, where's my UI? So hopefully this is the right view. So currently, or not currently, this isn't it. Yeah, there we go. So threads get confusing when you can have multiple threads on a finding. And then like, if you click on this, do we take them to the threads or do we show it directly in here? Because like I have this showing the thread within the vulnerability itself as like an item, but then you also have the comment view of that thread and like showing the vulnerability details. So it's kind of like this weird, it lives in two spaces. I don't know if this helps or not.
What was the thinking behind the check boxes next to the comment threads?
If I go, oh, here, those probably shouldn't be there.
Oh, okay.
Yep. I guess I did have like checkboxes on unresolved threads in here, comments, as you could check them and mark them as resolved.
I could even see that just saying there's a thread and that's a link and then it takes you over there. But I mean, I see the value in being able to view the thread within the context of the vuln too. So I understand why you did that.
Yeah, because otherwise you're like when you're looking through the comment view, you're missing the context of the vuln. So then we're like creating duplicate work too.
Yeah.
So I'm like, this is kind of weird too. When you're looking at the context of a comment of the thread, you open up the vuln details. Do we show the comments there, even though it's also the same comment you're already looking at?
I think this is going to be a sticking point if it comes up during our call later.
Yeah.
I think you just reference, I think the easier thing to do is just reference that there was a thread started or a thread resolved on the vuln, and then single source of truth, just keep it.
Sure. Yeah.
Just
And that's sort of what this is intended to do, but I think there's probably a lesser way to do that. That speaks a little bit closer to what you're talking about, Becca, where it would just be like a line item in the activity feed and you send them to that thread.
Yeah.
I guess the
exactly.
only thing that's a little not annoying with that, but like it can be helpful to see the multiple threads in context of the vulnerability.
Yeah.
So would that link you back to the overview page to view that particular thread?
Like if you were to click on this.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would just shift you. So if you're looking at comments and you open up like the vulnerability details, that would then take you and load in the whatever thread you're on.
I mean,
guess.
comments should actually say unresolved threads,
Yeah.
or it would be comments and would have a blocker
Well,
icon if there were unresolved threads.
well, we have unresolved threads, we have resolved threads, and we have general comments, and we have automated comments. And automated comments can be, or I think they're automatically marked as threads. And then we also need a way to show resolved threads. Sorry, I don't know if that's getting at what you were talking about.
No, it is, because this is the report version of all comments, and within a comment report, you would have all of
Yep.
those states or options. But in the blockers tab,
We'd,
you would
yep,
only
we'd
have
only see,
unresolved.
yes.
Do we need
Yeah.
a comment?
The reason I think I included comments here is it gives sort of that full picture. And then there's also, you can still comment like on a security finding. Yeah, it gets weird. Hmm.
We need, damn it.
Shouldn't this, wait, sorry, maybe we already covered this, but it could
Okay.
also, rather than comments, say unresolved threads.
The section under all checks would need to show both resolved and unresolved threads. It doesn't necessarily have to include general comments or other things like that. It could just be focused
Yeah.
on threads itself.
It could just say threads and have unresolved threads, resolved threads.
That's kind of what I was getting at, right? If this is focused on just those aspects, not on all comments.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's unresolved threads and the counter, it's green, and you go to it, then is it okay to still show resolved threads if the title said unresolved threads?
No, but if it just
Probably.
said threads. Because then I think
But can't you have a
just-
comment discussion that's a thread? Like, I mean, that's what I'm trying to get around is generic discussions that have threads in them versus unresolved ones that needed to be resolved because they were blockers.
Mhm.
And I think today, any comment that has a reply to it becomes a thread, an unresolved
Yeah,
thread.
isn't a comment the same thing as a thread?
So when you add a comment by itself, it's not a thread, but as soon as you respond to it, it becomes a thread. But you
Oh
can
my.
also explicitly choose to make your comment a thread when you're adding it. So it's confusing.
So a thread is a very specific thing.
Yes. A comment can become a thread, or a thread can be created on its own.
So threads does make sense as a label. We don't want
And
to
they're the
track every
things that-
single discussion or comment. We want to only track threads because a thread is the only thing that can be a blocking
True. Yep.
object.
Yep.
Okay. So you need to figure out how to handle threads, not commenting
Sure.
as a whole. Commenting is the parent, the child is a thread, and we need to figure out how to handle threads because they can block.
Mhm. Yep. I think that makes sense.
And in that regard, I think it's okay to move them into a different place. The problem I don't want to have happen is you come here and see thread one and you click on it and it jumps you back to the overview version of that thread.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be a weird experience.
Like, yeah, you need to be able to resolve everything that is blocking in your checks tab.
Yep. But then something that I've kind of contemplated for a while, and maybe this isn't even a big deal, is like if you were to have a thread, say it's on a security finding, if you want to click on that thread, is it more helpful to go to the security finding and see it in context, or is it better to go to a view like this where you see the thread and you see the reference to the security finding? And maybe this is fine for sure, but I think there's value in seeing, like if you're discussing something about the finding, I guess you have this drawer that could work, but this gets dicey too when you think about explaining this vulnerability and the policy violation stuff. Like you have multiple drawers on drawers type of thing then too.
I think you need to consider the performer, their goal, and the workflow that they're currently in, because it's possible. One workflow is I'm dealing with this vulnerability. It happens to have unresolved threads in it. In order to solve the vulnerability, I'm also going to resolve the threads, or else I didn't resolve the vulnerability. That's sort of the golden path where they cover it all.
Yep.
The silver path is I forgot about resolving those threads. Even though I fixed the vulnerability, I still see I've got blockers. Oh, I need to resolve those threads.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to manage those two workflows for the goal that's in their mind at the time of those workflows. And maybe this view is fine once they're in that silver path of, oh yeah, I forgot to resolve those.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Is it at all possible that when a vulnerability or finding gets dismissed, the thread auto resolves?
I mean, that's a
Might
question.
make sense. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Because like, is the thread relevant? If the vulnerability is already dealt with, maybe the thread's not important anymore. That would seem logical.
Could
Reading
somebody
through.
still come in and say, hey, why was this dismissed? Yeah, I mean, just because it's resolved doesn't mean that it's inaccessible.
One other
So
thought
hard.
I had on showing comments of this, like threads in this format, and this maybe is something to consider, maybe not, but comments today have obviously can be written in like straight markdown and you can see what they're on and stuff like that. But in this context, when we're showing them in isolation, we have to strip out the markdown so you wouldn't see that formatting. And you also don't see the object it's related to. So like if this comment or thread was on a specific line of code, you don't have that context here, where as comments exist today in the overview tab, you get all that context right away. So I think that was another struggle point on treating comments in this manner. I don't know if that makes sense.
Missed it. Sorry.
So we're sort of diminishing the existing comment functionality by treating them this way in the checks tab. So in the overview tab today, like every comment, if it's on a line of code, you see that line of code directly there. So you have the context that what the comment is about. And then obviously comments can be done in Markdown. So there's a lot of styling aspects that may impact it. Like if you put a table in here, for instance, on a comment, and that's the only thing in the comment, how does that represent in this sort of stripped down basic view? Like, are we just showing some weird Markdown then? So you're sort of,
you'll have to figure out a way to show a title or a summary or something. Like so this is the concept of bite-sized snack and a meal. When you're in this view, you want to give them just enough so they can make a decision to move on to the next step in their workflow. This is a triage view, for instance.
Yeah, true.
So when you click on it, that's when you can get the meal. It gives you everything. Now I'm ready to deal with this object. So I need to know everything about it so I can make a proper decision.
Yep.
I feel like this is for the create team.
It is, but because we're the ones proposing this checks tab, I want to at least be able to say, we have an idea of how this should work. Yes, unresolved threads need to live in the blockers. I'm going to work with Alex to figure out the details, but it's still going to happen.
Yeah.
hmm
Like that's what we should be able to say this afternoon.
Hmm.
Right now, we're hiding it. We're obfuscating it. We're like, I hope you don't ask about this.
Yep. I'll look at the main details here again and see. Like if we were to still show threads in context of a finding, so they're still there, you can access them, but then there's also a separate line item for unresolved threads. Still think that's okay.
Yeah.
And then I guess the only other way we're showing this is like when we're showing the thread view itself, is it okay to just reference an object like this and have it, we could either have it open up a drawer or you could just take you directly to that object and see the thread there too, potentially. So we don't even need this drawer.
Yeah, maybe this is the view that you showed a second ago, which had that entire content.
Well, I think we'd have
Whoa.
zooming in like crazy. So like I think regardless, this is how a vulnerability page would show up if it has threads. I think the question is, so we'd still need a thread view like this, where we're showing. I wouldn't expect to see
What if
all the
that's an accordion? What if it's all that content, but it's just collapsed because we're focusing them on the thread?
It could be. I tend to lean away from that just because opening up that accordion would be so jarring because look at like all this content here. But
Well, either
maybe
that or you do show all of that content, except you auto scroll down to the threads, the unresolved thread.
Mhm.
I think isn't that how we work now? When you hit the unresolved thread widget and you go next, it goes to the thread content, not the
Right.
where.
Yeah.
That's probably what you should do.
So then we have the reality, which I think is totally fine, where let's go back to this other view here, where if you click on this unresolved thread, for instance, it would actually take you to the security finding and scroll you to that thread itself instead of having a dedicated thread view, which could be okay. But it definitely, then you don't have, then it gets to be a little bit of a weird experience when you're scrolling through like this view, because we have this consistent navigation across the top. And instead of taking you across the different threads, it'd be taking you across different objects.
Yeah. I think you're right with this. This is dealing with threads specifically. So if you, it would probably be good if the object that it's referencing, if it's a vulnerability, for instance, we can say that it's already been dealt with. So then they can more quickly just be like, oh yeah, resolve. Like it's that silver path use case I mentioned a few minutes ago. I just forgot to check it off. I resolved the vulnerability, but I forgot to clear out these. So now I can just sort of quickly go through that. If it's not, then they can click on it and get your drawer and be like, oh yeah, I need to deal with this thing still.
That might make sense.
I think that's probably a good place to start.
Okay. So we know we want to show threads here.
Yeah. And then we need to test it to see if it's just, if that fits the mental model.
Okay. Yeah, I can certainly work on what the design proposal looks like with threads worked back into it, but just threads and not all comments.
Yeah.
I mean, or you just say this is the checks tab, threads aren't checks, and that empty state or the success state. Yeah. Well, the empty state for blockers doesn't say you're good to go merge. It just says like, check and make sure you don't have any unresolved threads.
Yeah, I mean, that could be it too, because like we already have a mechanism for handling unresolved threads today. And like, so this would either have to go away or get altered or something like that too, which they may or may
I think you
not
can
like.
still stay in that view. That doesn't have to change. We still have changes tab that has vulnerability stuff. Like, but this is not a monotonous design. You can do the same thing in multiple ways across all the different object things that you can do. Like that's not resolved. All we're doing is trying to help them get around that question mark of where do I go to do this?
Yep,
checks tab,
sure.
period, the end. You want to resolve and merge this, go to the checks tab. So that's why I think that unresolved threads, all blockers need to live in the checks tab or be accessible and deal withable in the checks
Mhm.
tab. Because
Yeah.
that's the primary goal for this redesign,
Mhm.
mergeability. Focused mergeability.
Sure. Okay, yeah, we can support that. And then we'll just see what kind of, I'll start working on design for that sometime this week. Well, I'm sure this will come up again when we talk about with the PMs later today too. But
Yeah,
we'll work on a
but
version with checks
yeah,
or threads.
after this discussion, I feel more confident that we can at least say, yes, we're resolving that. It will live in the blockers. It will still help. I'm sorry, the checks, blockers.
Mhm.
It will still help the author focus on merging.
Mhm. And I guess one thing, and maybe this is something I think the create team can decide. So when they use this unresolved threads functionality, currently today it jumps you, I think, across tabs between the changes tab and the overview tab.
Really?
I think so. I could be misremembering that. But if that is the case, do we take them? We have to decide which version of the comment we take them to, or the thread, because there's a if we introduce threads into the checks, there's a potential to have 4 different versions or 4 different duplications of the same thread across a merge request.
Yeah. I thought the
So you have
overview tab just had versions of everything, and it would jump you within the overview tab. And if that's the case, then I still think that's fine.
Yeah, let's see if I have. I'm curious now. So it takes you, boy, changes. I'm just looking at the MR right now and seeing how it works today. So it actually doesn't jump you between tabs, but it does exist on all tabs. So if that comment exists or that thread exists on the tab, it will take you there. If it doesn't exist on that tab, it doesn't take you anywhere.
I was
only-
actually thinking one interesting thing that could happen is you move it down into the widget on that row if we didn't break it out into the checks tab. But
Move
maybe the
Yep.
jumper.
Oh, sure. But then the jumper's not sticking in the same spot. It's at a, because currently the jumper is in a fixed location. So like this can scroll and you still have access to the jumper regardless.
Yeah, but it also means it works on every tab. So
Mhm.
what does it do on the checks tab?
And all
It would.
unresolved threads would be on the checks tab. So it would just take you to each of those individual threads. And I guess since you're toggling through unresolved threads, it would take you to the thread view and not to the full vulnerability details. So it would
Place to
take you to
start
like
anyway.
this version.
Yeah. Yeah, but in
Okay.
that section of the blockers.
Yeah, it would be, we keep it focused on the blockers because anytime
Yeah.
the thread's unresolved, it's going to show up in the blockers. This is only valuable to see sort of a summary of all threads and what's been resolved. It's just keeping up with sort of the format we've established with the other checks, having their dedicated
It's a
views.
consistency to have the dedicated
Yes.
view.
Yep.
Okay, I think I can live with that as an explanation later.
Sure. Yeah, I think that makes sense, at least the place to start, and we'll just see what boils up when we actually put that together.
All right.
I guess I was
Cool.
also starting to wonder, not that we have to answer this right now, but like, why isn't this just on the overview tab? Like, if you just come here and then you can merge from here, like I feel this like sense of I have to return to the overview page in order to merge. And so you bringing the merge button over onto the
Yeah.
checks tab was like, whoa, then what's left on the overview page? Like, could this not all just be the overview page?
It's a good question.
Yeah, I would like to think that once we get this, that when Alex begins to do a higher level over or review of the MR page,
Mhm.
that is a conclusion that they may eventually come to, that the overview tab is very simple and basic. It's high level
Summary.
summaries. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's what it should be, because I don't know, there was like something about wanting to return to the overview tab, and I don't know if it's just like because that's how it works and I'm locked into that, but I'm like, what else is going on? Like here, there's a number in the overview tab 5. Like what is that 5?
That's,
It's
I think that reflects threads.
right. So if that was brought over onto
1, 2,
checks,
3,
I guess it would.
4, 5, 6. Is that all comments?
Ultimately, if you're focusing on your MR and you're able to do it in one sitting, you should only go to the overview tab the first time you load the page. After that, you should never have to go there. The reality is that you're likely not going to resolve a typical complex MR in one sitting. You're going to post some comments, then you're going to jump to your next MR, which means when you get a to-do item that somebody commented on something, it'll pop you to the overview page again, possibly anyway. And that's, so you'll kind of be jumping in the middle of a workflow and at various times during your week,
Mhm.
you know.
Mhm.
But I mean, the point is that if you could actually resolve things, let's say you are an AppSec engineer and an engineer who created this MR, you can do it all yourself. You can live in the checks tab and clear it out and merge from there.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. And maybe it doesn't make sense to have the merge button here too. I mean, maybe it does make sense because there are these other options here, which might be helpful to know.
Mm.
Yeah, maybe that ending inbox 0 view is more of a go.
You're all good here. Go
Yeah,
back to the
you're all
overview
good.
tab.
Review
Yeah.
your final steps and it jumps to the overview tab widget or something.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that would probably make more sense than having a direct merge button here.
Yeah. And also, I believe the current expectation is that the merge when ready button is going to be defaulted on for most people.
Mhm.
I believe that's what creates thinking. So again,
Yep.
you wouldn't even see that merge button
Yeah,
on that
that's
empty
true.
state page.
Yeah,
Just
because you had
be-
talked about a second version of this design that
Yeah.
reflects that, and I haven't done that yet. But I can see that being helpful when you clear out all blockers. You say auto merge happening, click here to go see the status, and maybe it'd
to
take
watch
you
your
back here.
pipeline or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Update
Because you
update
just
that.
because you don't have any more blockers doesn't mean that you have the necessary approvals.
Yes, it does. Blockers are approvals are blockers as well now.
Oh, so you don't need somebody to come in and
Well, you do,
approve?
but once they're cleared out, once they've been approved, then you'll see the empty state. You're ready to merge.
Yep. So if you don't have all of your approvals, it would be a blocker.
Oh, right. Okay.
So if you can, iterate on that empty state. So it's more like go back and confirm you're ready to go or something. I don't know.
Sure.
Yeah.
Have this. Do we want to promote sending users to the warning section too, if those exist? Like, or do we want to just blockers are
No.
good, go to your overview, deal with it?
Yep.
Cool.
I think in the copy we could
Merge.
say, check your warnings if you want. I don't know. Tech writing.
Yep.
Popcorn, tech writing.
It's nice to promote doing that because I think it's a good practice to fall into, but some organizations might not care.
Yeah.
And sometimes you might not have warnings too.
Right. Right. Did you all both use popcorn in school?
Oh, yeah.
Both. I used to eat it. Do what?
Like when you're reading and call somebody else's name. So you read type of thing. Is that, or is it something way different?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah. So when we
Um,
had to like read out loud in class, you'd read a paragraph and then you'd say popcorn, Michael. Like you choose
Mhm.
somebody else in the class. I don't know why popcorn.
no,
Because you're jumping around from people to
You're
people. I don't
jumping.
know.
Yeah, I guess new people are popping up. Yeah.
I've never heard of that.
Oh.
Should I change this? Where the hell is that now? I added a assign random approver to the approval section just as an idea. You just make it popcorn reviewer.
Popcorn review. I love it.
It is nice to do fun things every once in a while.
Yeah, agreed.
David and I worked up a design at our previous job where we had a timeline. When you run a test, we're doing test design stuff. You're running a
Mhm.
test and your charts are updating live, but let's say you wanted to tweak a setting because you saw a result and you wanted to see if it would change anything. So
Oh, sure.
we allowed you to edit it, and it would. I don't remember the exact thing, but basically we put a little DeLorean, and it's when they are you ready to jump back to the future?
That's awesome. I love stuff like that.
That's something that got into the product.
Oh, I don't know if they ever built it.
Okay.
We designed it to get built.
Yeah.
I don't know if they ever did that.
Super fun.
We were particularly happy with that result.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
I remember years back, it was some random like magazine website, like Vanity Fair or something, but they used to have a secret like key command you could press in and then dinosaurs would just start popping out of the bottom of your screen.
Nice.
Vanity Fair
Awesome.
would do that.
Some random magazine like that. That was
That's
like, I
funny.
don't know if it was them for sure.
Little Easter egg
Yep.
by a developer. Yeah.
This is an old Mac tool before Mac built in unzip and zip, but did you ever use the app Stuff It and Unstuff It?
Sounds familiar. Yeah.
No.
I worked for the company that created that, and we created a drag and drop where you would drag the zip file into a box and it would unzip it, unstuff it basically. And
Mhm.
if you dragged it in when you were holding down some keyboard shortcuts, it would show the Kraken from the original movie, and it would say "Release the Kraken."
Oh,
That's
that's
fun.
awesome. That's fun.
That actually got built and released, so that was mine. I was proud of that.
That's cool. That's really cool. How do we get that into GitLab?
Yeah. Well, those are moments of delight. We just have to have the time. That's always the catch. That's where I
Paper
always figured
cuts.
the whole lovable maturity level would happen. That's when those
Even if
things
it's
pop
like
up.
under preferences, you just add like some goofball loading states, or you add a theme, Back to the Future loading states, or like in Navin, if that's how you say it,
Oh,
you
yep.
get the jokes when it's loading. I like that. It's
That's
silly.
a setting though.
No,
I
not a
guess.
setting. No.
Okay, yeah, just do it. So we do.
Yeah.
I know. I don't know her name, but she does the CSS animations. She did
Oh,
a
Julia.
showcase. Yeah, Julia.
Julia.
I think the hope was that she would be able to start applying some of that stuff to our UI.
That'd
be
be
cool.
More fun and
She does some pretty
Yes.
sweet stuff.
Yeah, she's great.
So I mean, that's if we see an opportunity like in that empty state, seize it. Why not? To do something a little more fun,
Okay,
because
I
that
have
is a
to
celebratory
drop.
moment.
Totally.
I know we've been here for a long time. Anyway,
Yeah.
great, awesome conversation. Thanks, y'all.
Yeah, super
Appreciate
helpful.
it.
Really,
I made
really good
notes.
job.
Made notes
Thank
in the
you.
agenda for all the
This
things
is such a
that
game
we were
changer.
talking about.
Cool. Thank you, Justin.
So, yep. Thanks, y'all. Have a good
Awesome.
good day.
You
You too.
too. Take care, guys. People.